Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical, environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I am your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Berkeley, California, and Bob is off on assignment today. He's taking a little bit of a break in April, but you'll still be getting lots of episodes with me and a few with Bob. But joining me today to talk about I'm just going to call it the state of the resistance, but I'm joined by my longtime friend and comrade, Patrick Young, who is a labor organizer, climate organizer of many things based in the DC area. Patrick has worked with a number of movement organizations, including worked for labor unions, was part of Rising Tide North America, helped start Shutdown DC, and most recently has worked with the Movement Infrastructure Project, which I think you're a founder of that as well, correct?
Yes.
Yep. So welcome to the Green and Red podcast, Patrick.
Glad to have all of these years.
I know.
I was a little sad that I didn't get invited, so I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. And a sneak preview for people. This could be we're expecting this to be the beginning of a series that we'll be doing with Patrick on the regular. This past weekend, we saw millions in the streets. I've seen estimates anywhere from 1 million to 5 million hitting the streets in these hands-off protests, rallies across the country, 1,300 actions in towns large and small, and just also a little bit going on with the movement. We've seen a viral campaign emerge around Tesla, and then we're also seeing constant direct action organizing around issues like Palestine, migrant rights, climate, and much more. This is all sort of like par for the course in the second Trump administration. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Patrick, maybe we could just start with hands off. Can you actually talk about the hands off weekend of protests? So you were pretty involved with some of that.
Sure. So an emerging group, 5051, which started because they were having 50 protests in 50 state capitals on one day on February 4th. They put out a call for a people's veto mobilization where they were calling on DOGE and the Trump administration to keep their hands off our Social Security, hands off our healthcare, hands off our pensions, hands off our postal service, hands off all of the services and infrastructure that our communities need to live and to thrive. And they ended up pretty quickly partnering with the Women's March. Separately, Move On and Indivisible were looking at a mass mobilization for the same weekend. And all of those mobilizations ended up rolling into a big national mobilization here in Washington, D.C., and also similarly large mobilizations in, as you said, 1,300 cities across the U.S. and around the world. And it was a pretty impressive display because going into the weekend, my understanding is there's something around 600,000 people who had signed up and said that they were going to go to one of the mobilizations. Here in Washington, D.C., we were planning logistics initially for 10,000 people and then for 20,000 people. And here in D.C., we ended up with well over 100,000 people at the Washington Monument. Many other cities around the country had massive mobilizations: Chicago, New York City, Boston, the Bay Area, and then even a lot of smaller towns around the country had mobilizations with hundreds or thousands of people, and I think that this is the first. We've seen protests of the second Trump administration from even before Inauguration Day, but this is the first time that we've seen really mass numbers turning out. And more specifically, mass numbers that aren't connected necessarily with existing movement organizations. You know, the turnout in Washington D.C. Exceeded our online RSVPs by 10 times, right? So this is lots of people who are showing up because they're hearing about it on TV or wherever else and finding their way into the streets.
Yeah. And also in the list of places, the numbers and the images I saw from red state rallies and locations were also huge. I saw pictures from Salt Lake City and Boise where just like lots of people, probably more in the hundreds or even thousands, turned out. But I think when we're seeing this in red state America, particularly around these issues, I think it's sending a message as well.
Yeah, and this is it's not unique to this this particular weekend. Over the past during the last recess session, Bernie Sanders and AOC held a series of town hall rallies, once again in red cities in red states, talking, coming with progressive, people-based message about kitchen table issues and people's basic human rights, and they turned out tens of thousands of people. So this is not something that's really limited to major cities or left or liberal enclaves.
And how do you think this fits into a larger strategy opposed to Trump's agenda? That being said, I also want to acknowledge that some of the larger institutions, political institutions, media, courts and law firms are capitulating in disturbing ways. But how do you think this fits into a larger strategy opposed to Trump's agenda?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the problems that the left has had, and it's part of the reason that it took really into the third month of the second Trump administration to have major mobilizations, is that we haven't necessarily had we don't have a coherent, we certainly don't have a strategy that everyone is aligned around. And I'd say that we don't quite have a coherent strategy yet. We've gotten to, I think that this is a major, I see this as a major turning point because we went from this moment where we had smaller groups of people in the tens, hundreds, or thousands showing up at agency headquarters, Tesla, Tesla dealerships, and in city halls around the country. This is where we've moved, I think, from smaller protests into a level of popular opposition. But I don't think that where I think we're falling short is I don't think that we have a strategy to win. We have a strategy to get more people in the streets, and in a lot of ways that's going to happen as the material conditions continue to get worse, and as really shocking things, like sending migrants to really concentration camp like settings in El Salvador are happening. More and more people are going to get into the streets. The challenge is we don't necessarily have a collective vision about how we're going to win. We had, for a moment, the inkling of a vision where we, if we understand that in order to stop this autocracy, we're going to have the institutions start to fight against each other and oppose each other. We were very close to having the Congress not pass a budget on when the funding deadline ran out on March 14th. But even the institutional left was very nervous about doing something like that. It wasn't until a couple days before the deadline that large groups even started talking about that. And obviously the Democrats completely capitulated and gave Trump his continuing resolution. So we're getting more people in the streets, but we don't necessarily have a plan to create fissures between between the elites that are holding up the Trump administration.
He's actually better at making the fissures between himself and the ruling elites than we are at this moment. We've seen large-scale disruptive movements for like the last 10 or 15 years. Occupy, Ferguson, Standing Rock, summer of 2020, and then last year, the student encampments around Gaza. All of those, I would actually argue, have some level of strategy and fit into like a political agenda of the more institutional left liberal part of the spectrum. How do you see 2025 playing into that sort of that arc of the last 15 years or so?
Yeah. So, I think that we see these moments of uprising kind of ebb and flow. In we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. We don't know what's going to trigger it. But we see these periodic movement uprisings that are coming, and where we have lots of people in the streets, lots of mobilization. And then those moments recede, either as people get exhausted, or we start to make some incremental wins. So I think that what is different here, I think, is that the level of repression we're starting to see from the Trump administration, and the permanent and in many ways irreversible damages to our institutions, that is really that is happening, and it is a period where things are getting worse way faster than they have in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and that was my next question: is how do you see this increased state repression that we're seeing? They're mostly targeting Palestine solidarity groups and individuals and students who are on green cards, but how do you see that affecting things? Is that kind of trigger? Is that part of why we saw so many people in the streets, or do you also see it leading to repression? There's repression where people are getting thrown in jail or potentially deported or sent to these supermax prisons in El Salvador. But do you think it'll have a chilling effect as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there are. I am already hearing of mobilizations that are being canceled or put on hold or changing in the way that they're happening, because of the particularly because of the threats that non-citizens particularly are, whether they're documented or not, are facing. And that's a real kind of that's a real wake-up call when we have people who are non-citizens, and they have legal status, are feeling afraid to go out into the streets. So I think that is definitely real. And the question, I think, for our movements is the lesson that we learn from repression, and is the way that we respond to state repression by keeping our heads down and hoping that the eye of the state doesn't come after us, or do we understand that the state is coming, and it's going to come for all of us eventually? So it is even more urgent that we step up and that we do whatever we can to resist these really outrageous maneuvers by the current administration.
Speaking of that, because they're definitely trying, it seems like they're trying to divide out the Palestine solidarity movement. And the hands-off rallies had no mention of Gaza in their demands. There was no hands-off Gaza. But then in D.C., I believe I heard there was a pretty large hands-off Gaza rally that was a little bit separate. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So There was a the hands-off rally in Washington D.C. happened at the Washington Monument, and then sometime 2 or 3 weeks after this rally was the hands-off rallies were announced, a number of Palestinian solidarity groups announced a different mobilization also to happen on April 5th. I think that at the time um, the Palestinian solidarity movement was skeptical that these mobilizations on April 5th were going to amount really to anything, and that they were going to be able to use their, they were going to have the kind of movement energy and institutional support to kind of, to ignore the fact that there's another demonstration happening and basically go for it on the same day. In the end, both of the mobilizations were very large. And I think I'd say that from the reports that I've heard, the Palestinian Solidarity demonstration grew to 10 or 20,000, which is in normal times a pretty significant mobilization.
Well, that's what you were expecting at the hands-off rally.
Exactly.
You said, right.
So in normal times, that's a pretty significant mobilization. I think that it is the left has failed again and again on the issue of the rights of the Palestinian people. And it is it's always frustrating to have a situation where we have two mobilizations in the same town over largely aligned largely aligned issues. But as far as I know, the separate Palestinian action wasn't really a response to Palestine, Gaza not being lifted up in the demands of April 5th. They just thought it was an open Saturday to do a mobilization.
I see. Just to switch gears a little bit, the other movement that has been taking the country by storm, and we've done shows on this, which actually resulted in one of the organizers being doxxed by Elon Musk, is the Take Down Tesla movement. There's a level of disruption going there. Tesla its share price is in the toilet, and people are trying to return their Teslas around the Bay Area. You see stickers all over Teslas that say, "I bought this before Elon. I knew Elon was crazy," stuff like that. How do you see that as I wouldn't even call it a campaign. I would call it a movement because it's become so viral. But how do you see this disruptive factor with that?
Yeah, so I think that it's we're in a moment where we need more action. We need to try more things and put more and more people into the streets. I am, and I think it's exciting to hold listen, we've got the richest person in the world is sleeping in the Lincoln bedroom in the White House, and going agency to agency and destroying, and really causing havoc. And so it is, I think it's really smart to say, hey, we want to figure out how to challenge his personal business interests. My guess is that it's more likely to result in Tesla's board pushing him out than it is to result in Trump pushing Elon Musk out. And when you get to that level of richness, losing some money might not be your primary motivator. So it's definitely important to have him thinking about what's going on with his brand and get some pressure, around this particular one of his babies, but I don't know how far I don't know how far that goes.
Yeah, I agree. I do find it quite interesting the level of public emoting he does though over his brand being under attack and how people don't have any empathy for him because he's lost so much money and all of that. I always find these other stories interesting about how he was like cyberbullied on a video game and he like got very upset about it and things like that. But whatever. We don't have to dive into Elon's psyche.
It's a scary place to be.
Yeah, it's a scary place to be. I have two questions left. One's around labor because you worked in labor for a long time. Sean Fain has called for a general strike in 2028. Sarah Nelson says it needs to happen sooner. How do you see the labor movement fitting into this moment currently?
So it is, the labor movement has an incredibly important role to play because these are large organizations that are that have significant resources, and they are funded by working class people. They're funded by their members, not by institutions. I am very excited about Sean Fain in that kind of visionary leadership to say, okay, we're going to put a date on the calendar. It's going to be far out there, and that is. And we need to do some structure tests. We need to, do some action between now and then in order to get it to happen. I also think that Sarah Nelson's right that 2028 is too little, too late, and I would.
We may not have unions in 2028.
Well, we might not
or elections.
Or elections, or we might all be in El Salvador prisons. I think that Sarah Nelson actually has, during the last Trump administration, it's one of the best examples of what I think that the labor movement ought to do, which was during a Trump fueled government shutdown. The AFA didn't say, "Hey, we're going on strike," because they're under contracts that exposes their members to significant risks. It also exposes the treasuries of their unions to significant risks. We don't, but what they said was, "Listen, we are fatigued. It's dangerous for us to go to work. We are." We care about the safety of the flying public. So because of that, many of our members are not going to work. And I think that I think that's a really good blueprint for the labor movement. We are a long ways away from a political general strike, but to the extent that unions look around and they say, listen, we're not going on strike, but it's unsafe to continue doing this work while we're fatigued, or we don't have the resources that we need to do. And because of that, we're not going to show up, or because of that, we're going to take some other action. That seems to me like, listen, the impact is the same either way, but it is a really sophisticated way, I think, to for unions to insulate themselves, from some and their members from some really significant risks that, frankly, I don't think that we necessarily want them to take, at least without a plan to win.
I have one last question because I feel like we'll talk about the labor movement and the general and the bigger, greater movement in the future. But just one last question. Also over the weekend, this also probably is a symptom or something that's kind of unique to my particular algorithm, but I see a lot of online leftists who've been very critical of the mass demonstrations this weekend because they were organized by liberal groups like Move On and Indivisible, which were funded by Soros, who's actually really just, he's an anti-communist and a neoliberal. And I'm wondering how you feel about some of that online left trolling around these things.
Well, I simultaneously agree that there are critiques that there are critiques to be had. One of the big challenges our movements have is the fact that we don't have a strategy with a revolutionary imagination in a plan to actually win. The challenge is that, but I think it's good that people are in the streets, and that is, no matter what your political analysis, a necessary step to get from where we were last week to where where we need to go. So I think that the political analysis of a lot of these rallies is, it's not there, it's not where it needs to be. But I also don't see the most vocal critics of these mobilizations actually putting hundreds, let alone hundreds of thousands or millions of people into the streets. So I take some of that criticism with a grain of salt, and I think we should have a conversation when those folks are able to mobilize mass demonstrations.
Exactly. Patrick, it's been fun talking with you today, and I'm hoping to have more conversations like this. We're also the Black Hoodie crew today, I believe.
Yeah, I'm more than special for you.
See, if Bob had been here today, there'd be no Black Hoodie. He's in Houston, so it's already like 95 degrees there, so crazy shit like that. Folks, we've been talking with Patrick Young, with the movement organizer, longtime organizer, friend and comrade with the Movement Infrastructure Project. If you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to this on audio, give us a rate and a review. And then if you really like us, go to our website, greenandredpodcast.org, hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And we'll talk to all of you again soon. Everybody go out and make a lot of trouble and misbehave, and stay safe.